My name is David, and for most of my life, I believed family was everything. I believed that blood meant loyalty, respect, and love. I believed a son would never betray his father, and I believed my own son would protect me when the world felt heavy. I was wrong. I was so damned wrong. I wasn't harsh. I wasn't the strict father who yelled for mistakes. I was the dad who stayed up late to help with math homework, who worked double shifts to afford birthday gifts, and who pretended to like those weird video games just so we could bond. If anything, I loved too much. I gave too much. But love doesn't guarantee loyalty. Love can blind you to danger. And in my case, love almost destroyed me. I raised my son, Ethan, to be a good man, or at least I thought I did. He was smart, charming, the type of kid every parent proudly talks about. Teachers loved him, friends admired him. Heck, even strangers complimented him for being such a respectful young man. I felt lucky, blessed even. But sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the person you trust the most. Life wasn't always easy. My wife passed away when Ethan was just 13. It shattered us both. I broke from the inside, and Ethan, he closed himself off. I tried to be both mother and father, but grief is tricky. It changes people. It shapes them, and sometimes it breaks them. Over the years, I noticed something, a shift. Ethan's kindness began to fade. The smile he once had, the one that made his whole face light up, became something forced. His words grew shorter, sharper. He stopped calling me Dad and just said, "Yeah?" or "What?" like I was some annoying background noise. But I thought it was the teenage phase. Everyone goes through it, right? I didn't want to believe my son was slipping away. I owned a small construction business. Not big, but honest work. I wasn't rich, but I made enough for us to live comfortably. The business was supposed to be Ethan's one day. The dream was to pass it down, father to son, keep the legacy alive. But I didn't know. Ethan didn't want my life. He wanted more. He wanted fast money, quick success, and a lifestyle I could never give him. Things started getting strange when Ethan turned 21. He stayed out late, came home smelling like expensive cologne that I definitely didn't buy. New phone, new sneakers, designer clothes. I asked him where he was getting the money. He laughed. That laugh, I'll never forget it. It was the kind of laugh that says, "You're too stupid to understand." He told me he got a job. I didn't push him. Maybe I should have. But I trusted him, even when I shouldn't have. Then came Brooke, a girl with soft brown hair, sharp eyes, and a smile that didn't reach her heart. She was the type who walks into a room and acts like everyone owes her something. I didn't like her the first time we met. There was something cold about her, something calculating. But Ethan was in love. Or at least, he thought he was. He changed faster after she came into the picture. He stopped helping me at the business, stopped eating dinners with me, stopped being around at all. I'd wake up and find him gone. I'd go to bed and find him still not home. I was losing him, and I didn't know how to stop it. One night, I heard yelling outside. I looked out through the window, and there they were, Ethan and Brooke, arguing by the driveway. She was crying, he was shouting. I opened the door to check on them, but Ethan snapped at me, told me to stay out of his business. The boy who once cried in my arms when he lost his first pet was now looking at me like I was nothing. It broke something in me. But the real betrayal, the one that cut deeper than anything, came months later. One morning I received a call from the bank. They asked if I had authorized several large transfers from my business account. I froze. I did not. I rushed to the bank, my heart pounding so loud it felt like my head would explode. And there it was, the proof. My son, my own son, had been stealing from me, slowly, quietly, for months. Transfers done under my login, my credentials, my identity. The bank showed me the IP addresses, the location, the timestamps. All done from inside my home, from his room with my laptop. I felt sick. Nausea crawling up my throat, my hands shaking so hard the paper nearly fell from my grip. I confronted him that evening. He sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone, acting like nothing mattered. I held the bank statements in my hand. "Ethan," I said softly, calm, too calm. "We need to talk." He didn't even look up. "If it's about money, don't bother. I'll pay you back later." Pay me back? Pay me back? I had spent years providing for him. Everything he owned, every meal he ate, every comfort he had came from me. And now he spoke to me like I was some loan shark? I told him I knew. I knew about the transfers. I knew he stole from me. I knew everything. He looked up then, slowly. But there was no guilt in his eyes. No fear. No apology. Just annoyance. "Dad," he said, leaning back, crossing his arms casually, "you'll be fine. It's not like you're poor. Don't make this a big deal." Not a big deal. He had drained nearly 80% of my business savings, money meant for payroll, equipment, rent. The business would collapse without it. I asked him why he would do this. He smirked. "Because I deserve a better life than the one you built." The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Because I deserve better. He didn't stop there. He told me he and Brooke were planning to move to Los Angeles to start some business. He said I should be happy for him. Happy. That my son had ripped my life apart. Happy that he saw me as a stepping stone. Happy that he didn't think twice before destroying me. I felt something break inside me that day. Something that would never be repaired. But betrayal? Betrayal doesn't end where it begins. Because the next morning, I discovered the truth. He hadn't done this alone. Brooke planned everything. She convinced him he didn't need me. She convinced him I was holding him back. She convinced him to take everything. And he listened. My own son chose a girl he barely knew over the man who raised him. But this story isn't just about betrayal. This is about revenge. Because when the people you love push you to your knees, you don't stay down. You rise. And I was about to rise in a way Ethan and Brooke never saw coming. Because taking everything from me, that was their first mistake. But assuming I'd let it happen quietly, that was their last.
I heard the front door close behind them that night, and I didn't sleep. Not because of noise, because my mind wouldn't let me. Images played in a loop, bank statements, transaction timestamps, Ethan's bored face. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, fingers curled around the mug that no longer warmed me. Grief and anger taste the same at 3 in the morning. Bitter, metallic, sharp. I thought of my wife's voice. Remember when she said, Don't let them take your good heart for granted. I should have listened. I hadn't. Not then. But now, I would listen to something else. My own quiet voice. The one that said, fix it. Do it right. Do it clean. First thing, I did what any sensible man would do. I locked the office safe. Twice. Changed passwords. Called the bank. Reported the fraud. Paper trail. Documentation. Proof. Not because I wanted to be petty, because if I was going to come back, I'd need facts, not fury. Facts win in a courtroom. Fury wins in a bar fight. I prefer the courtroom. The banker's voice was perfunctory at first, then softer, then practical. Mr. Harper will flag the accounts, will issue fraud reports. If we can trace transfers to external accounts, there's a chance of recovery. Chance. Not a promise, not a miracle, but a chance. I took it. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Mark. He ran a small legal practice and had that slow, steady way of talking that made problems feel less like avalanches and more like things you could shovel through. He arrived with a thermos of coffee and a sober expression. We sat in my office, among blueprints and dusty helmets, and he listened. I handed him the folder. Bank statements, timestamps, IP logs, emails. The paper rustled like bones. Embezzlement, Mark said. The word landed heavy. If we can prove intent, we can press charges. I asked, will they go to jail? The question surprised me. For a moment, the other life, simpler, angrier, called to me. I pictured jail bars. I pictured Ethan behind them. Seeing him reduced made something ugly in me smile. But I stopped myself. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. I wanted more than a headline. I wanted a reset. Maybe, Mark said, but that could ruin your son entirely. You sure you want that? I was sure of this. I wanted to stop the bleeding. I wanted my business alive. I wanted my dignity intact. And I wanted him to understand the cost of treating people like disposable items. I didn't answer about prison. I asked about recovery. Mark outlined options like a man drawing a map. Criminal complaint, civil suit for damages, freezing assets, injunctions. He talked about speedy things, smart things, things that wouldn't blow up into a public war on page 1. That night I watched Ethan on the couch through the window. He and Brooke were laughing, heads close together, her hand on his knee. The way they moved said everything. They believed the world owed them. They believed my life was theirs to spend. That image hardened something cold in me. Good. Let them be comfortable. Let them feel invisible. That would make the reveal sharper. I started with the business. Employees matter. Payroll matters. Reputation matters. I could have screamed and sued and left them to rot, but that would have burned the company, the people who'd trusted me, and the legacy Ellen and I built. I would not let their greed torch innocent lives. So I focused on containment. I transferred what cash I could salvage to a new account I controlled, covertly. I secured client files. I met subcontractors and told them I'd handle next month's work. No drama, just logistics. Calm. Every choice I made had to look ordinary, routine, boring, predictable. Even the way I smiled when I passed Ethan at the kitchen island had to feel unremarkable. He noticed, of course. Men like him noticed tone, but he couldn't read the ledger under my skin. He assumed I was the same old fool. Perfect. Let him assume. Then I did a quieter thing that surprised even me. I went into the corners of my past where I'd hidden mistakes and triumphs. I opened old contracts. I dug for the things people forget. Clauses, little legal teeth, hidden liens, promissory notes. There are always strings. In business, there are always strings. 2 years ago, I'd co-signed a line of credit to secure a supplier. Small print. A name I thought had been paid. I reread it. My old habit of thoroughness found a ladder where others saw a wall. If you know where to pull the thread, you can unravel the sweater. Night after night, I worked with Mark to stitch together a plan that would give them a lesson and not ruin anyone who didn't deserve it. We filed an injunction to freeze the accounts linked to the transfers. The bank cooperated. That saved the business from collapsing mid-month. I called clients and said I had an internal issue to clear up. They nodded. Some were sympathetic. Most just wanted work done. So we did the work. We were scrappy. We were honest. At the same time, I set up a new entity, a consultancy that would allow me to do work without the old overhead. New contracts, lower risk, better control. I called it Harper & Son Consulting. The name felt strange to me. At first, it felt like a promise to a future that might not happen, a dare. But I kept the name. If he wanted it someday, he'd have to earn it. There was one more move I made that nobody expected. I started meeting people I hadn't seen in a long time. Clients, suppliers, contractors. Not to beg, to rebuild. To remind them of the man who built things right. My hands shook when I walked into the union hall, but that cold handshake with old-timers reminded me who I was. They respected work. They respected craftsmanship. They respected a man who kept his word. That earned me new jobs and a steady cash flow. It also gave me something else. Leverage. Allies. People who would vouch for me when hell tried to rain down. Weeks went by. The bank fight dragged like a bad winter. Email threads, subpoenas, sleepless searches through digital footprints. Ethan called 3 times. Each time I let it ring out. Once he texted, "Dad, I'm sorry. Broke. We'll pay you back." I read it and felt my chest contract. The little boy in me wanted to run back and fold him into my arms and tell him it was okay. The father in me wanted to check the transfer records and see proof before believing. The man in me wanted to teach, not to be taken advantage of. So I did none of the above. I kept my silence. That is a weapon people don't expect. Silence makes people fill the space with their own guilt. The city council one night sponsored a small fair. I walked through it because I'm stubborn like that. A man who keeps going. A food truck with strong coffee. A kid selling lemonade. I sat on a bench and watched other people's lives pulse around me. I watched families fold into themselves with ease I had assumed was normal. It wasn't. Life had been a work site of constant repair for me. But something about seeing strangers laugh without needing to check a bank balance felt freeing. That freedom was necessary. Redemption starts with understanding you're allowed to have it. And then the real maneuver began. Not legal theatrics, not quiet reconstruction. A move so simple it almost felt petty, and perfect for the lesson I wanted to teach. Ethan and Brooke were planning to leave the city, move to LA, start their new life. They'd told friends, they'd posted shots of cocktails and co-working spaces, so I did something small that would break their timeline cleanly. I sold the house. People imagine that selling a house is an emotional hurricane. For me, it was the opposite. It was an act of finality, of carving the bad from the good. I met with Brian, a savvy agent who smelled success like old-timers smell wood smoke. He walked through each room, admired the crown molding I'd installed, sampled the oak floors with his shoes. He said the word, buyer. Then the word, Cash. 10 days. Done. I don't think most people in their 20s understand how big a house represents. To me, it held sweat, parenthood, memory. To them, it was a balance sheet line.
That difference in values was the wound I planned to press. So I signed the dotted line with hands that trembled only once. Paperwork moved like a metronome. Bank transfers lined up. We closed within a week. The sum was more than I'd ever seen in one place. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I counted, signed, and felt the weight shift. Money in the account doesn't replace memory, but it buys choices. I moved quietly to an apartment on the edge of town. Smaller. Clean. Not charity, not surrender. A place with a kitchen I could cook in and a window for the sunrise. Sunset wasn't a spectacle there yet, but the idea of waking up without needing permission felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. I opened a bank account in my name, alone. I visited a lawyer and restructured my will. I updated beneficiaries where necessary. I put assets in places that made sneaky hands pause. I did this not out of spite, but to protect what remained mine. The day I taped the envelope to the front door, I had tears in my eyes and no shame in my steps. The note was short. It had to be. Ruthless in brevity. I wrote in lined, careful handwriting. No theatrics, no insults, just facts. The house is sold. The money is secured. I am alive. All your belongings are in storage. Claim them within 30 days. I put down my love, and the rest of the paper was business. Signature. Date. Done. I could have stayed, confronted them publicly, filed civil suits, but I wanted the lesson to land like a cold slap. I wanted their heads to clear the way real life clears things. So I bought a tiny camera disguised as a charger, one that would let me watch them find the note, watch the realization spread across their faces like oil on water, watch entitlement collapse into panic. I set the camera to stream to my phone, sat on my new couch, and watched. When the notification pinged, motion detected, I felt my heart trip. There they were, Ethan in his jacket, Brooke with her scarf, fumbling with keys that refused to turn. You can picture it, his brow furrowed, her temper rising. The note came down. Their initial disbelief shifted to rage. They screamed. They cried. They argued about lawyers. I watched them disassemble themselves in the very living room they'd treated like a warehouse. There was no vindictive joy in me. Just a quiet satisfaction that truth, when served plain, sharpens minds. Neighbors glanced out. Voices rose. Phones were dialed. Their pride had no parachute. I sat back in my chair and let the sound reach me. It was a strange symphony, a sound I'd heard in my head for months. Their hero complex was collapsing in real time, and for the first time since the theft, something like peace settled over me. Not because they suffered, because I had taken control back, because I had stopped being the passive creditor in my own life. But this wasn't the end. I knew they would fight back. They would call friends, lie, manipulate narratives. They might even try to get the paper to run a sympathetic piece. That's what entitled people do. They weaponize pity. So I prepared.
Copies of bank statements, transaction records, everything lined up like neat bird cages. Truth is the best armor. I turned off the camera only when my hand stopped shaking. The sun had set. The city lights blinked on. I poured myself a small bourbon, the kind Ellen used to say was too stiff, and sat with my back against the wall. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt something warm and oddly light. Not joy, not triumph, calm. A settled kind of sorrow that makes room for a new plan. There's a peculiar silence that follows when you pull the rug out from under people who thought it was theirs. It echoes. It demands a response. I knew Ethan would respond. He would not go gentle. He would use the networks he'd courted, the friends who had given him fast advice and no conscience. He would call lawyers. He would call reporters. He would call friends who owed him favors. That was the part I was ready for. Not because I wanted a war, but because their fall had to teach better than words ever could. I slept that night like the man who had finished his first line of a difficult blueprint. There was more to draw. There was more to plan. Part of me wondered if I'd been too harsh. Part of me thought I'd done what Ellen would have wanted. Protect the work of a lifetime. In the morning, the real work would begin. Evidence folders, meeting clients, standing tall, and watching them try to crawl out from under the rubble they themselves had made. They would not quietly accept this. They would not go away. They would rage, bargain, resort to every small cruelty they knew. That was expected. But in my pocket lay a folder thicker than their excuses. Statements, emails, offer letters, proof. When the time came, the story I'd been telling myself in the dark would be told aloud, with witnesses, with receipts, with the slow, steady voice of someone who knows the cost of what he's lost and the price of what he's willing to pay to get it back. I turned the light out. The apartment settled around me like an honest thing. Tomorrow they would come knocking, and the city would hear what they tried to hide. Tomorrow I would stand in a courtroom if I had to. Tomorrow I would make certain they could not pretend ignorance. But tonight I let the quiet do its work. I slept with the image of their faces still fresh in my mind, unaware, arrogant, vulnerable, perfectly human. The alarm buzzed early. The fight was far from over, but the direction had changed. And that, I realized as I stood and pulled on my shirt, was everything.
The knock came exactly 3 days later. Not loud, not angry, not panicked. Just 3 soft taps. The kind people use when they expect doors to open for them. I didn't answer at first. I stood in the kitchen with my hand on the counter, breathing, grounding myself. Sometimes silence is the knife you sharpen before cutting. Then I opened the door. Ethan looked smaller, not in height, in presence. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes darting, and there was a twitch in his jaw he didn't think I noticed. Brooke stood beside him, arms crossed, expression tight, not sorrowful, calculating. "Dad," he said, voice cracking slightly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside without saying a word. Let them walk in. Let them see how different the space felt. No photographs of memories they'd monetized.
No warmth they felt entitled to. Just clean walls and quiet. They sat on the couch. I didn't offer water. Hospitality is reserved for guests, not thieves. The silence stretched. It was Ethan who broke first. It is always the guilty who can't stand quiet. "I made a mistake," he said, hands out like he was surrendering to invisible police. "A bad one. I shouldn't have taken the money. I panicked. I felt like the world owed you something?" I asked. His eyes flicked up, sharp, caught. He didn't deny it. That was something. Not redemption, but something. "I thought I could fix it before you noticed. We were behind on rent. We were trying to move. We were building something." Brooke finally spoke. "We were building a life. Your life never made room for us." Her voice was steady, accusing, as though betrayal was justified because it was inconvenient to wait their turn. I watched her, the way she held her chin, the practiced tremor in her tone. The woman could sell guilt like perfume. "You stole from a business your mother and I built. You stole from your family. And now you're telling me it was self-care?" Her eyes narrowed. "We didn't steal, we borrowed." Borrowed. As if loans taken without consent become charity when wrapped in entitlement. Ethan leaned forward. "Dad, please, just help us. We can pay you back. We just need access to the accounts again. Just temporarily, just until—" There it was. Not regret, not remorse. A request for the same access that ruined everything. I smiled. Small. Controlled. "No." The word hit the room like a hammer dropped on glass. Both of them flinched. "You don't get to be angry with us. You can't just sell the house. You can't just cut us off. We have rights." "Rights?" My voice stayed calm. Too calm. "Yes," she snapped. "We were going to live there. That was our home." "You didn't pay the mortgage. You didn't pay the property taxes. You didn't buy the groceries that sat in the fridge. You didn't contribute to the walls you claim. A house is not a birthright, it is work, and you did none." She opened her mouth to argue again, but something in my face must have stopped her. People sense when the conversation has left the realm of negotiation. Ethan's eyes started to shine, not from remorse, but fear. "What happens now?" he whispered. Now. The part they were never prepared for because they assumed I wouldn't act. "You'll receive legal notice within the week. There are charges pending. Fraud, embezzlement, wire misuse. I have enough documentation to ensure the case stand even if you try to negotiate your way out." His face drained of color. "We're family," he said. "And family doesn't steal." Silence again. This time heavier. Brooke shot to her feet. "This is abuse. You're destroying us out of spite." "No," I said. "You destroyed yourselves. I'm simply refusing to bury the evidence." She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Ethan followed slower, like his legs suddenly weighed more. He paused before leaving. "Dad," he said, voice small, "if Mom were here, she'd take my side." It was the cruelest thing he could have said. Weaponizing the dead feels like hitting a bruise that never healed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break. "No," I said. Quietly. "Your mother believed in consequences. She believed in earning trust. She believed in building your life with your hands. You are the opposite of every value she tried to give you." He swallowed, hard, and left. The door clicked shut. I stayed standing for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because grief is slow-moving, like cold tar. It takes time to settle. The legal process began faster than I expected. Freeze orders, account tracing, asset audits, paperwork thicker than a winter coat, meetings filled with coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and stress. Word got out. People always talk. Stories travel faster than truth. Some said I'd turned on my kid. Some said he'd betrayed me. Some said the whole family was cursed from the start. Small towns don't need facts. They need gossip. But I held my ground, quiet, steady, focused. Then something I hadn't planned for happened. The community took sides. Old workers, the ones who remembered my wife, came by the new office. One brought soup. One brought bolts for a project. One left a note that said, "You did right. A man can be generous and still have boundaries." They didn't say much else. Men of that generation rarely do. But their presence was enough. On the other side, Ethan and Brooke rallied their own support. Young friends who loved big words like toxic and narcissistic without knowing either. They posted online. "He threw us out. He didn't help us. He cares more about money than family." They painted themselves as abandoned victims. People believed it. People always want the shortest story. But something shifted. Quietly, not in public, but where it mattered. Employers saw the story. Banks saw the charges. Landlords saw the credit freezes. And doors stopped opening for them. That's the thing about the world. It doesn't punish fast, but it never forgets paperwork. Weeks passed. They tried everything. Crying voicemails, angry texts, promises, threats, manipulation. Every emotional tool in the drawer. I responded only once, and only in writing. "Your choices are your consequences, not mine." That was it. No explanations, no debates, no emotional unspooling, just truth. Then came the court date. They sat across from me. Ethan looked like a boy again, one who didn't understand how fire works until it burned him. Brooke looked furious enough to combust. Their lawyer spoke like a man who believed charm could rewrite bank statements, but the facts were facts. Wire logs, digital signatures, security footage, transfers to personal accounts labeled LA Move Fund. They didn't stand a chance. The judge didn't sentence them to prison, not yet, but they were ordered to repay the full amount plus damages. Their assets were seized, their accounts restricted, their credit frozen for 7 years, the financial version of exile. When the verdict was read, Brooke's face crumpled, silent, shock collapsing into dread. Ethan didn't look at me. Not once. As we stood to leave, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize love wasn't enough to save someone who didn't want to be saved. I walked out of the courthouse into cold autumn air. A wind picked up. Leaves scratched across concrete. The world moved gently, indifferent to human wreckage. I breathed in, sharp, clear. It was over. Or so I thought. But I hadn't seen the last of them, not by a long shot. Because when people lose comfort, they don't learn. They look for someone to blame.
They came back angry. Not the thin, calculating anger of entitlement, but the kind that corrodes a person from the inside, desperate, dangerous, and unpredictable. I should have known it wouldn't stop at courtroom losses and frozen accounts. People who lose everything tend to try anything to claw it back. I was in the new office when the first message came through. A number I didn't recognize, a voice with too much adrenaline behind it. "You think you're done?" the caller hissed. "You think we'll just disappear? We'll burn you down." Static swallowed the last word. I set the phone down gently and stared at the wall, where Ellen's photo hung like a calm witness to chaos. Threats are cheap. Consequences are costly. I sipped my coffee and kept working. Panic is a currency they'd spent long ago. They tried the obvious first. Smear campaigns, lies whispered into microphones that only the ill-intentioned tuned into. A sympathetic comment here, a misleading post there. The internet is a swamp for rumors, and at first their fans rallied, sending me messages filled with righteous anger. But the swamp doesn't hold when you have receipts. I let the posts float like dead leaves and addressed business. Facts don't flinch. They cut straight through noise. Then they tried manipulation. A lawsuit filed quietly in another county. Old papers, bogus claims, forged signatures. I'll give them this. They were bold. They believed they could use the legal system as a cudgel, dragging me into a maze of filing fees and court dates until I was too tired to stand. But when you've spent your life reading contracts and understanding fine print, forgery smells like an amateur job. Mark's team dismantled their case piece by piece. The judge frowned. The claims were dismissed. Sanctions were levied for wasting the court's time. The message was clear. Don't fake what isn't there and hope the world blinks. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Desperation makes people reckless. So they turned to a friend of a friend, a man with a sketchy history and a confidence problem. He promised to persuade me to change my mind. He used words like persuade, intimidate, fix things. They wanted someone who could make a scene, someone who could scare me into reversing course. They didn't want evidence or justice. They wanted fear. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, he walked into my office like a man rehearsing toughness. Rain dripped from the hem of his jacket. He had a scar along his knuckle that read trouble. He smiled without warmth. "You Roy Harper?" he asked. "Yes." I kept my voice steady. Calm is an armor that rattles the insecure. He sniffed, like someone who expected hostility or riches, whichever came first. "We need to talk about arrangements." I gestured to the chair. He sat, hands flat on his knees, like he was showing me he had nothing to hide. But everyone hides something. Nobody walks into an unknown man's office without a reason. He began with testy pleasantries, trying to measure the man in front of him through small talk. The movie had been rehearsed in his head. He planned to start small, a threat here, a broken window there, escalate until I either paid or caved. He reached across the desk and slapped a file down. "We can make your life difficult," he said. The file contained threats he planned to deliver, anonymous letters, staged break-ins, a plan to make me look unstable. A few loud noises, a few suspicious strangers, the sort of petty theater that makes neighbors question sanity. It was a cheap play. Cheap men cast cheap scenes. I listened, head tilted like an old man learning new dance steps. Then I did something none of them expected. I offered him coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter stuff they sell in airport kiosks. I asked him questions. Where did he work? Who had hired him? Who financed him? He got flustered. People who rely on intimidation lose composure when someone treats them like a human rather than an enemy. Pride crumbles when it's fed patience instead of heat. He grew sloppy. He said too much. Names, addresses, an email, wrong address typed in a hurry. A detail he couldn't avoid. I noted everything. The seeds he planted revealed the field, their network, their weakness, their pretensions. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "You can walk out right now and nobody will look you twice." He lifted his eyes. For a moment he didn't look like a villain. He looked like a frightened man auditioning for a role he'd never play again. The bravado splintered. He muttered something about bills and family and walked out with his head down. He never came back. Turns out even the hired fearful have limits when they realize they're the only fools in the room. That could have been it, a closing of a bitter chapter. But the men with nothing to lose don't always back down at the first cold reception. They escalate. That's the nature of those who live off blessed reckoning. They believe harm scales with stubbornness, and so they took one last gamble. They tried to hurt what I loved without touching the legal scaffolding. They went after my reputation among the community who'd stood by me. Nothing that hits home like social standing. They thought if they could turn neighbors, suppliers, friends, and old colleagues against me, they'd have more than money. They'd have social death. They started whispering to a longtime client, a municipal project manager I trusted. A phone call here, the insinuation that I was unstable, that a man who sold his house and moved into a small apartment couldn't be trusted with public contracts. They baked their poison with the right ingredients: fear, shadow, a hint of truth, a lot of timing. And the first domino fell. The project committee put my bid on hold. I felt it in the silence of my phone. Calls that used to be routine went unanswered. That soft quiet is louder than any insult. I knew why. The city didn't want controversy. Not with election season around the corner. The people who pull the levers prefer predictable headlines. My hands remembered the old rhythm. Pick up the phone, call the right person, remind them who you were, who you still are, what you built. I started returning the calls myself. Not angrily, not with accusation, with clarity. With the calm voice of a man who knows how to rebuild. I walked into the council office with a manila folder heavy with documentation, project timelines, past contracts, safety records, photos of finished work. Allies matter. people who know your name matter more. Slowly, deliberately, we pushed back. The committee reopened the tender. My company was back in contention. The project moved forward. People felt the relief of a man who fixes things. You cannot smear a life built on competence for too long when the work speaks for itself. But let's be honest. If they were only after business, perhaps we'd have called it a day. The truth was uglier. They were angry with me beyond restitution. They wanted chaos, and when they couldn't manufacture it, they opted for one last act of cruelty, a show of nastiness they thought would humiliate me personally. They kidnapped a symbol. One evening, I received a photo via a burner number. There it was, Ellen's wedding band, the one she'd worn through every project, every late-night shift, every celebration. The ring sat on a diner table, the background blurred. The message read, simple, cruel. Give back what you stole or we release it to the highest bidder. They assumed theft of an object would wound me, that possession of a trinket could be turned into leverage. They were wrong on 2 counts. First, the ring was a symbol, but the true symbol, the life Ellen and I built, wasn't a piece of metal. Second, they underestimated what happens to men who have tasted.
The ring was precious, but it did not hold my power. I called Mark. He told me to do 3 things: don't chase, don't negotiate, and document everything. The instincts to run into the dark and tear things apart are strong, but they're the enemy of strategy. If you want to win, keep your hands clean. I set a trap that required patience more than fire. They wanted drama, so I gave them a stage where the only audience would be truth. I posted an anonymous tip to a local pawn shop board, mentioning a ring matching Ellen's description and a transaction planned for a dim warehouse on the south side. The men who acted on my behalf, the ones who still entertained the idea of a quick sale, bid on the line immediately. They never learned to recognize setting a hook until the fisherman sat back and smiled. On a foggy night, the warehouse stank of old oil and impatience. Men with cheap jackets and older tricks arranged themselves around a folding table, preparing to flip the ring. I watched from a safe distance on my phone. The live feed came to me clear as glass. I could see them. I could see their hands. I could see their faces. One of them lifted the ring and laughed, as if humor had replaced fear. Then the lights went out in a precise choreography, not because I needed to strike fear, but because anticipation is a muscle that grows tired with waiting. When the lights flicked back, there were men in uniforms, city police, plain clothes, quietly efficient. The ring lay in the center of the table, and the men who'd stolen it sat stunned, their bravado leaking out like air from a punctured tire. Charges were read, handcuffs clicked. The men who thought they could pull strings found themselves ensnared in a net woven from patience and paperwork. Ethan and Brooke tried to deny connection. Too late. Phone records, burner purchases, a surveillance photo. The truth has a way of rounding corners. They tried to distance themselves from the act, feigning ignorance, but the net was already closed. The police called. They asked questions. Names surfaced. When the call came to my apartment, something inside me tightened, like a violin string tuned to a precise note. "We have evidence linking your son and his partner to the ring theft. Would you like to come down?" the officer asked. I went, not because I wanted to gloat, but because a father should be present when their child's life collapses.
There's a responsibility in witness. I sat in a small fluorescent-lit interview room and watched Ethan's face move from petulant to frightened to finally broken. He didn't speak to me then, not in words. The silence between us was an ocean with no bridge. Brooke's eyes slid to mine when the handcuffs were tightened, and for the first time I saw the animal strip away. A scared person who'd made a chain of bad choices. The legal consequences were immediate: theft, conspiracy. The petty threats had escalated into real criminal activity. They were charged, arraigned, and for the first time in months, the world's indifferent machinery of justice moved with the weight of truth.
I won't say I was happy. There's no pleasure in watching your child's life fracture under the weight of choices. The complex knot of sorrow and justification laced my thoughts. They had tried to make me small. They had tried to turn my dignity into a sideshow. When the police read the charges, it felt less like victory and more like confirmation. Consequences are real, and sometimes they arrive in the most unromantic ways. Court dates followed. There were statements to prepare, evidence to present, questions that carved out small caves of memory. I testified, not with a vengeful heart, but with clarity about the timeline, about the transactions, about the chain of events that had bled me dry. The judge listened. The prosecuting attorney painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. When the verdict came down, Ethan faced restrictions stronger than any I would have wished him. He got a sentence that meant years of probation, mandatory restitution, and community service, and the chance, if he chose to take it, to rebuild. Brooke, with a longer slate of charges, faced a path that cut off some of the options young people take for granted. They'd created consequences beyond their control. The aftermath was not cinematic. There were no slow-motion righteous walks. Instead, there were small acts, letters read in legal rooms, apologies forced by court orders, therapy sessions mandated by probation officers. It was messy, human, and painfully ordinary. Justice doesn't always look good when it's happening. It looks like paperwork. It looks like quiet. Months later, I sat on a bench in the park and watched a boy play soccer with his dad. The laughter rose like something I'd once known. My hand shook slightly as I pulled Ellen's ring from my pocket. It had been returned through an evidence locker after the case concluded. The gold was dull, small scratches telling stories I didn't want to read. I put it on a chain and hung it around my neck. It sat heavy, a memory I chose to wear near my heart rather than lock away like an accusation. Ethan sent a letter from a community program where he learned carpentry as part of his restitution. He wrote about small victories, sanding a tabletop, meeting deadlines, showing up. His handwriting wavered in places with the tremor of someone who's learning to feel again. He asked for a meeting. Not forgiveness, not a pardon, just a conversation. A small suspended hope hung between his sentences. I met him on the bench beside the small pond where our town feeds ducks. He looked older than his years, the arrogance gone, a humility there, like a new coat. We sat. We watched the water. "He could have walked away," he said finally. "I could have," I replied. The truth sat between us like a third person. "But I didn't. I didn't want you to learn by being broken entirely. I wanted you to learn the price of what you did while you could still rebuild." He nodded, eyes on the ripples. He talked about regrets, about guilt that kept him awake, about how Brooke had been a comfort and an anchor dragging him toward bad choices. He spoke about the smell of sawdust in the workshop and how oddly the rhythm of sanding calmed him. He wrote about the humiliation of court, the people who looked away,
and the days when even small kindnesses felt like a surprise. I listened. I forgave in ways that mattered and guarded in ways that would not repeat. Forgiveness is not erasure. It's an act of practical mercy that requires boundaries. We spoke until the sun turned the sky the color of old coins. We didn't fix everything. We didn't promise fairy tale endings. But for the first time in a long time, we were honest. When I walked home, the city lights reflecting in puddles, I felt the odd looseness of a man who used his pain to build something else, a life that didn't depend on others' gratitude. The house I'd sold was a temple of memory. The money in the bank bought me choices I'd never taken, simple travel, giving Ellen's favorite flowers to strangers, fixing things for people who'd never owe me. I kept my dignity. I kept my mind. I kept my heart, albeit patched and cautious. People ask me now if I regret what I did. Sell the house, press charges, cut ties. It's complicated. I regret not seeing it sooner. I regret the nights I cried into my pillow before I learned to act. I regret that a family I loved so much had splintered into this terrible shape. But I don't regret reclaiming myself. I don't regret showing my son and those around him that choices have consequences, and that dignity is not a currency to be spent on others' whims. In the end, the loudest lesson of all is this: people can be changed, but they must want to change. When they don't, sometimes the only productive thing you can do is give them consequences sharp enough to wake them. The last time I sat with Ellen's ring on my chest, I thought about the night he first called me Dad with real affection, about the math homework, about nights spent holding sick foreheads. Those moments are stitched into the fabric of who I am. Scars, they called them in the old days. Proof you lived. If you enjoyed this story and felt the twist land like a gut punch, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have done the same? Would you have pressed charges or found another way? Share your take. And if you want more stories where justice